Thanks for joining. We'll get started in probably 2 to 3 minutes. Just waiting for a few more folks to join. But if you can rejoin, let us know in the comments of where you're joining us from. Peter, you're in. Where are you this week?
I'm in Los Angeles.
I'm currently in New Jersey. Also, some people on our team who are in Argentina right now. New York, nice. I'm just realizing in the Northeast, we're kind of getting to our last month of summer before we hit fall. We'll get started in the next 2 minutes. And just as you're joining, just let us know where you're joining from. Always interesting to see. And then we'll get started in roughly a minute. All right, we're going to get started in the next minute. So just hold tight and then we'll get started. All right, we'll get started. First of all, I want to thank everyone for joining. I know it's everyone's taking time out of their busy day, so we're going to try to make this as kind of just condensed and informative as possible. And just a couple call-outs. Please feel free to add questions in the comments. We'll address them either in real time or where it makes sense in the presentation. We'll also have some Q&A time at the end. And so just to kick it off, today we're going to be talking about navigating Crummey trusts. If you aren't familiar with Crummey Trust, it's a powerful trust structure geared towards families who are trying to minimize estate taxes and really maximize what they pass on to future generations. It's a great way to pass on assets, really efficiently use what's called your gift exemption, and minimize estate taxes and gift taxes so your kids, grandkids get as much as possible. Now, if you don't understand all of that, that's okay. We'll go deeper into that. But before we get started, I want to introduce kind of who's presenting. Peter, I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name is Peter. I am the head of estate planning at Valur. My background is I'm a trust and estates attorney. I worked at a couple international law firms doing high net worth estate planning for many years, and then I came to Valur in March, and I've been helping the team build out the estate tax planning strategies.
Awesome. And just to introduce myself, I'm Mani Mahadevan. I founded Valur, and for me, it started with kind of a simple premise of I worked for a startup that IPO'd and was trying to really lower my taxes, and just found it confusing, expensive, slow, and so started Valor. And the broad idea is, how do we make tax mitigation, estate planning more accessible? And really, how do we help you use kind of what are the strategies that the best family offices in the world use to lower their taxes and make that accessible to US taxpayers? And really kind of our difference is we help you set up these strategies at no cost, in essentially real time, so you don't have to wait weeks or months. You can chat with our team, Peter, myself, other kind of experts on our team at no cost to understand these. And really, we charge for administration of these structures, and we're typically roughly 20% the cost of a trust company. But let's kind of dive into this of what we're going to talk about today. So, we're talking about Crummey Trust, and key things to understand are, what are the gift and estate tax exemption? That's a tax that's roughly 40% or higher. And that's what really drives the use of Crummey Trust. Now, it's really important right now because there's changes that are going to increase the number of people who pay gift and estate taxes, and so it's particularly pertinent. We'll go into kind of what are Crummey Trusts and the key benefits, kind of walk you through kind of just a case study so you can understand what's the value and how valuable it can be, and then really walk through some kind of key use cases and how you can take advantage of Crummey Trust, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. Peter, anything else to call out there as kind of a key things to talk about?
No, I think that covers the major items.
Okay, so let's get started, and maybe we can get started with Peter with what is the gift and estate tax?
Yeah, so the gift and estate tax is there's a 40% federal tax on either lifetime transfers or transfers at death. There are sort of two important exclusions from the normal gift and estate tax rules. And so the first one is the lifetime exemption amount, which is currently $13.61 million per donor. And so you can give away up to $13.61 million during your lifetime without having to pay any gift tax. Or you can, sorry.
No, so just to restate that, essentially is people can give away that $13.6 million roughly, individually with no gift or estate taxes, at least at the federal level, right? And then it's 40 cents of every dollar above that is essentially what they lose if they want to give it away.
Yeah, and that's the federal gift, estate tax. There's also a lot of states, a dozen states in the District of Columbia have their own state estate taxes. So if you live in New York State, your real estate tax rate's actually 49.6% once you account for New York taxes. But if you live in Florida, it's 40%.
Got it. And maybe even just taking a step back. So whether it's Crummey Trust or these pieces, who is this pertinent to? Like, who is this going to impact? Who should really be focusing on this, and who should care about it?
Yeah. So I would say Crummey Trusts are for anyone who thinks they're going to eventually owe estate tax, or thinks they might eventually owe estate tax. So it's not just the people who currently have $14 million. It's people who, maybe only have $3 or $4 million today, but might have a lot more than that in the future. So a 45-year-old with $3 million, could easily be over the exemption, in 50 years when they die. So it's a pretty large pool of people. The other thing that Monty sort of referred to earlier, alluded to, is that the exemption amount in current law is going to be cut in half in less than a year and a half. So January 1st, 2026, it's scheduled to fall to about 7 million. So even people who think that they're never going to hit 14 million might hit 8 or 9 million and still have an estate tax issue. So it's a lot of people fall into this category.
Yeah, and so to really boil it down, this is kind of pertinent and impactful for anyone who expects or plans to give more than $7 million over the course of their lifetime to future generations. Is that the kind of simplest way to boil it down?
Yeah.
And this is also pertinent for those folks, their advisors, their CPAs, anyone kind of in their financial ecosystem as well, or who's looking to support those folks. And maybe we can give some context so this gift and estate tax exemption is dropping by half. Why is it getting cut in half?
Yeah, it's because it was temporarily doubled back in December 2017. Congress passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, and what that did was it doubled the estate tax exemption from what it was, and so it went from about $5.5 million in 2017 to $11 million in 2018, and then with inflation, it's increased to $13.61 million this year. But that doubling of the exemption was only a temporary thing due to complicated budgetary reasons. They weren't able to make it permanent, and so it expires in a year and a half, which is 8 years after it took effect.
Yeah, I think that's a really important call out. Now, so there's this amount that you can give over your lifetime, roughly $13.6 million now, getting cut in half to roughly $7 million starting January 1st, 2026. But there's also what's called the annual exclusion, right? What is that annual exclusion, and how does that connect with this lifetime exemption?
Yeah, so people often conflate the annual exclusion and the lifetime exemption. They're totally separate, but they're both very valuable for different reasons. So the lifetime exemption is just it's a single amount that you get for your entire life, and it's tied to the donor. And it's every time you make a gift, you use up some of it. So if you had $13.61 million of exemption and you made a $5 million gift, you'd only have $8.61 million of exemption going forward, and that would be true, next year, in 20 years, barring changes in the exemption amount. That's just sort of your lifetime ledger. The annual exclusion is different. It's an amount that you can give to beneficiaries each year. It renews every January 1st. So if you use it, you make a gift one year, you get a new exemption the next year. And it's not just per donor; it's per donor and per beneficiary. So you can. So it's currently $18,000 a year. You can give $18,000 a year to 20 people if you wanted to. So you're not limited by. It's not tied to you. So it's not just $18,000 of total gifts. It's $18,000 that you can give to each of your beneficiaries. So, you might only have one child that you'd want to help, in which case it's $18,000. But if you're a grandparent and you have 3 kids and 6 grandkids, you could give $18,000 to each of those 9 people. And if you're married, your spouse can also give $18,000 to each of those 9 people. And so,
and I think that's
collectively, it's a big number.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, right? So essentially this lifetime gift and estate exemption, right? Like that's a total number that you can use over the course of their lifetime. It doesn't replenish itself, right? This annual exclusion, first you get to give that amount, and critically, the lifetime gift exemption is just total you get to give. It doesn't matter whether it's one person, 10 people, or 100 people, right?
Yeah.
The annual exclusion, on the other hand, is per person. So this is to your point of take the parent, 2 parents, 3 kids, and each of those kids and there's 6 grandkids. That means that they could give $18,000. Each parent could give $18,000 to each kid, and then they can also give $18,000 to each grandkid, right?
Yeah.
And so that's if I'm doing my math right, which hopefully I am. It's $162,000 each year before they get into their lifetime gift exemption.
Yeah. And so, if you make these gifts consistently year after year, it can actually exceed the value of the actual lifetime exemption amount. So, if you made $164,000 or whatever gift every year, you know, after a certain number of years, you'd be giving away something close to or exceeding the lifetime exemption amount. So it can be pretty substantial.
Yeah, and maybe we call this out of just to show how impactful is estate tax scenarios. Maybe you just want to kind of walk through these three different scenarios of if you're giving X amount and how much you owe in estate tax, because this is really in part what Crummey Trust, this annual gifting, lifetime gift exemption is solving. Just want to kind of quickly run through that, Peter.
Yeah. Could you go to the next slide? That's mine is still.
So maybe I'll just run through this. So really what it's talking about is how much this gift and estate, the federal gift and estate tax will owe. So let's say you're passing on $14.6 million. You'll, in today's world, because you have that $13.6 million exemption, you'll owe gift and estate taxes on roughly the $1 million over that exemption. So 40% times that $1 million, so you'll owe $400K. Now, if you have another $9 million that you're gifting, so you have a $23.6 million estate, you'll owe roughly $4 million in estate tax. If you have a $63 million estate, that's $20 million of estate tax. Now, the key thing, and this is, we'll get to this with Crummey Trust, the fortunate thing is whether you have a $60 million estate, $100 million estate, with the right planning and the right structures, it's actually fairly easy to completely avoid all gift and estate taxes. And Crummey Trusts are kind of a big part of that, to part of what we're saying of, hey, as you have kids, grandkids, you can gift more, but there's also unique features of Crummey Trust that make it a really powerful and flexible structure to not only pass on assets, but minimize gift and estate taxes. So maybe with that, Peter, let's get to kind of go to kind of Crummey Trust. I want to give kind of just like an overview of what they are, how they work, some of the benefits.
Yeah. So Crummey Trust is an irrevocable trust. So you set the terms, and those are the terms. They're specifically geared to qualify for the annual gift tax exclusion, and so some trusts don't qualify for it because they don't have the right terms. But they're set up so they qualify for the annual gift tax exclusion, and you can make, typically they're for a single beneficiary, and so if you had 3 kids and you wanted to set up. You wanted to make Crummey gifts to each of them, you would set up three different trusts, and you would set up recurring payments each year, and you would make $18,000 gifts to the trusts each year.
Got it. And so maybe do you want to explain kind of why someone would, like, what are the key benefits as to, okay, so you're gifting that annual exclusion. So let's take the scenario, there's 3 kids, 6 grandkids. Let's just focus on, hey, you set up 3 Crummey Trusts just for your kids to keep it simple. And it sounds like each parent would give $18,000 to each trust.
Yeah.
So each parent they'd be giving $36,000 to each kid each year. Yeah. So that's $108,000, and that's just the kids, right?
Yeah. So there's a few different tax benefits that a Crummey Trust provides. So the most obvious one is that you're getting that $108,000 in this example a year out of your estate for estate tax purposes. But there's two other really big benefits, tax benefits. So one of them is all the appreciation on the money inside the trust is also outside of your estate. So you gift $108,000 a year. Those you invested in the stock market or index funds, whatever. Eventually, the appreciation is going to dwarf the amount of principal that you actually contributed, and so that's a big benefit. And then the third big benefit is that so these trusts are usually set up as what's called grantor trusts, which means that the donor typically pays the income tax that the trust earns. And so, in other words, you're paying the trust income taxes for it. Over time, as you contribute more and more to the trust, and as the trust generates more and more returns, eventually the trust gets pretty big, and its annual income tax liability becomes pretty substantial. And so ultimately, that's actually the biggest benefit is being able to pay the trust taxes. If you give, if you give $36,000 a year to a trust, for 30 years, but by year 30, there's going to be a huge amount of money in the trust.
And
Um,
let's just make this practical, right? Like, let's take the scenario where between the three kids, hey, each year they're giving $36,000 plus inflation to each kid's trust. That money's growing, compounding. Let's say those three trusts are worth $1 million, and it generates $100,000 of income, right? So first of all, that $100,000 of income, let's just say it's taxed at 35%. So that's $35,000 of tax liability there. Now, typically that $35,000 would reduce the value of those trusts. Those trusts would have to pay the taxes, and so they'd lose $35,000. Now, what happens with these Crummey trusts is actually the parents, they can pay that $35,000. So first of all, they can gift between the two parents $36,000 to each kid's trust every year. And then they can pay the taxes on the income that trust generates. And to kind of what Peter's saying, this is really powerful because there's twofold benefits. One is instead of that trust losing that money, the trust gets to keep what would otherwise be lost to taxes, gets to reinvest it, and that money keeps growing. So instead of losing that 35K, it gets to reinvest it, and that $35,000 will create more wealth. And if you know anything about compounding, over a long time period, it becomes really significant. Every year, you keep your taxes and get to reinvest it. I'm sure everyone here would love to not pay taxes, and you'd be a lot wealthier. Well, that's what a Crummey trust allows these kind of kids to do. And then the other part about it is, let's say that the parents are, take that scenario, they're worth 60 million. They're significantly over that gift exemption. So one, they have their lifetime gift exemption. They're likely going to deplete that. Then they're going to keep on gifting each kid, each grandkid, their annual exclusion. And then it's almost like another annual exclusion of they can pay the taxes off. And that doesn't count as a gift, doesn't count as a gift, or doesn't use up their lifetime gift exemption, and doesn't create a tax. So it's almost like a bonus gift that they can make to their kids.
Yeah.
Is that right? Or am I missing anything there?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, let's say it's like, what are the common use cases when people use Crummey trusts?
Yeah. So it really makes sense for anyone who has any sort of estate tax issue or exposure. I think a lot of times. So first of all, in my experience, most people who have estate tax exposure don't make annual annual exclusion gifts at all, which is a huge mistake. Those who do typically make outright gifts, which have a few drawbacks, which I can kind of go into. But and if they don't make outright gifts, they're usually making gifts to custodial accounts for minors, like a NUTMA account, for example. And so, sort of briefly, that the reason, there's a few reasons, but the big reasons you want to give to a Crummey trust instead of giving to someone outright. So first, there's the tax benefits. So if you give someone $18,000 a year, you're getting that $18,000 out of your estate, but you're not paying the taxes on an $18,000, right? You can't pay your kids income taxes normally, but if you set up a Crummey trust, you actually can. You can pay the trust taxes. So there's
just to kind of hit that home, that 18,000 you give, it's the income taxes on that 18,000 this year. It's the income taxes on that 18,000 and its growth next year. It's essentially the lifetime. You have to think about it as to like really understand the impact of. It's at 18,000, and let's say it's you and a spouse, it's $36,000. That the taxes on that this year, plus every single year moving forward, and the growth on that, and that's where it really becomes substantial, and the compounding really makes it meaningful.
So if you give, to make it more concrete, if you give $36,000 a year adjusted for inflation to a Crummey trust, and you start it when your kid's a baby, by the time the kid's 50, assuming let's say 9% returns, there's going to be $35 to $40 million, depending on assumptions, inside of the trust. So it's just a huge number. And if you'd given the money to the kid outright, you'd have nowhere near that amount in the trust because the kid would have been paying their own, or the kid wouldn't have nearly that much money because they'd be paying their own income taxes.
Yeah. And,
and so it's more tax efficient. But the other thing is, the trust gets creditor protection. So, if you give money to your kid, and your kid gets sued because they get in a car crash, or they get divorced, and the divorcing spouse is trying to claim some of their assets. That's, if you use a Crummey trust, those assets aren't subject to creditors, and including divorcing spouse. Whereas if you give the money directly to your kid, there's a real chance that some sort of creditor can go after those assets, and so it's more creditor protected. You also retain some level of control over the assets. So, obviously, if you give your 20-year-old $36,000, they can spend it however they like. If you put it in a trust, and you have a trustee who's not your 20-year-old kid, they can't go out and spend the money on some party or vacation or whatever, and so that's sort of a guardrail. And then compared to custodial accounts like Atma account, you can keep the money in trust for the rest of the kid's life. So with Atma account, for those who aren't familiar, they're accounts that people set up for children, but they have to terminate when the child becomes an adult. So it's usually either 18 or 21, depending on state law. But a lot of people give $18,000 a year to an Atma custodial account, and then the kid turns 21, and there's $1 million, whatever, in that account, and the kid gets that $1 million, which they can spend personally.
Yeah, this is, I'm sure, speaking for kind of a lot of folks, is, personally, I don't know if it would have been a good idea to give me $1 million at 21. And I'm sure that's, as parents think a lot of times with their kids, right? Like they want to give that money to them, but 21 may not be the right age to give that to them. And so this is a control feature. Now, all these things, and there's some great questions in the comments that we'll get to. So this is where, it kind of sounds like, so one use case, if you're over the lifetime gift exemption, this is kind of a really obvious way to pass on assets. There's also potentially kind of another, let me know, Peter, of like, let's say, you're close to the lifetime gift exemption and you want to start, depending you expect to be over it in the future. This is another way to give small increment amounts every year, not move a ton of assets outside of your estate, but also give you flexibility of preserving your lifetime gift exemption, but also starting to kind of incrementally move assets out. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Now, and I'll just kind of, all these things, it's kind of a very powerful package. You call out, people don't use this often enough. One of the key things to call out here is, historically, you're gifting $18,000 per parent per year, per kid, grandkid, every year. Now, typically one of the holdups is the cost and overhead to set up and manage these. Usually with a traditional law firm, it'll cost somewhere between $5,000 to $15,000 to set this up. And then you're paying a trust company, $5,000 to $10,000 per year to manage these, which can really take away a lot of the upside. Part of the premise of Valur is we can help you set up these trusts at no cost, and our administration fees are fairly low, $1,000 per year. So it makes it, you can set up same day. So it's fast, you're not paying fees that take away from the upside of these accounts, and just make it more accessible. And so really you can get as much value out of this as possible. Now, going to some of these questions, there's so a really good one here is like, how is a Crummey trust different from an IDGIT? And why would, and I'll lead you on here, Peter, a Crummey trust is an IDGIT, but why do we call it something else? And how do we use it differently from a typical IDGIT type of trust?
Yeah, so it is a type of IDGIT, but it's sort of a specialized type. So it's designed to qualify for the annual gift tax exclusion. And so there's a couple differences. So besides the additional language that the Crummey Trust has that allows the annual exclusion gifts to qualify the annual gifts to qualify for the annual gift tax exclusion. So the big difference is that they aren't dynasty trusts. The way they're set up, so an IDGIT would typically be a dynasty trust that can last for 300 years or whatever it is. Crummey trusts aren't, for sort of complicated tax reasons that I can get into. They're typically designed to last only for the beneficiary's lifetime, and then they terminate on the beneficiary's death. So if you set up a Crummey trust, it'll last until the beneficiary dies. So if your kid's 5, it'll last the rest of your 5-year-old lifetime. But it's not going to last 300 years the way that it just often do.
Yeah, and to kind of add on, this is where it becomes complicated if you're trying to use this annual exclusion. Typically, a normal IDGIT will have your kids, all their future kids as beneficiaries, and to this point may last for forever.
Yeah.
And this is where you can't really use your annual exclusion to gift to that type of trust. And so this is where you'll have Crummey Trust plus an IDGIT for all of your future descendants as separate trusts. So essentially, it's like you can think of it almost as like hygiene, but you just want to separate those things so you can use that annual exclusion effectively. Yeah. Kind of going to this is probably an easy one here is what's the tax rate on that someone pays on the again going to the scenario of there's $1 million in the Crummey Trust, it generates, let's say, $100,000 of income. Yeah. Is the marginal tax rate their kids' tax rate, assuming their kids make less than they do, or the parents?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So typically the way these are set up is as grantor trusts. Setting up as a grantor trust allows you to pay the trust taxes, which is, like we're saying, extremely valuable. But it means that the trust is disregarded for income tax purposes. And so it's like a single member LLC. So the parents are paying the taxes at the parents' rates. And so it's not the kid's rate, it's the donor's rate.
Yeah. And just it's kind of got a good call out of in the last kind of addressing the last question we were talking about. So essentially they're going to pay their parents' marginal tax rate is the easy answer here. Going back to the previous one, we mentioned dynasty trust. You're just going to give a quick 30-second answer on what is dynasty trust instead of us assuming everyone knows what those are.
Yeah, and this kind of dovetails with Nirav's question. So a dynasty trust is a trust that is typically for the benefit of all of your descendants, and they can last typically for at least 300 years. And the basic idea is that they're very long-term wealth accumulation vehicles, designed to transfer wealth not just to your kids but also to your grandkids, great grandkids, etc.
Yeah, and the idea, just to frame it simply, is the longer you set these trusts up for forever, because you're avoiding what's called, similar to the estate tax, it's called the generation skipping tax for people that are 2+ generations away, so grandkids and future generations. If your trust can last for forever, you can avoid the generation skipping tax for forever. And so essentially having your assets grow and avoid a 40% tax for forever is a really valuable and powerful way to ensure your family gets more money. And just kind of to illustrate, we'll address, I know there's a great question on kind of comparing this to 529s, but let's kind of just go to what is the value of this? And Peter, maybe kind of just let's walk through this. You can walk us through everything through this scenario and just understanding what's the value that people are getting with the Crummey Trust.
Yeah, so this is a scenario where you have a married couple lives in New York City. They have 3 kids, high income, net worth of only $5 million, so not a crazy high number. They set up Crummey Trust for each of their 3 kids, and they make the $36,000 gifts each year. So if you look at the chart, so if they don't set up a Crummey Trust, then obviously there's no Crummey Trust savings. But if they do set up a Crummey Trust in year 25, and they die in year 25, they will save their children about $5.5 million of state tax just by moving assets out of their state into the Crummey Trust. And if they die in year 50, they will actually have saved about $53.5 million of estate tax for their kids. The exact number is sensitive to certain assumptions, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. This is assuming 9% pre-tax IRR.
And this is really, again, like, I know these numbers are fairly massive when you're thinking about, in this case of 3 kids, each parent, so they're gifting, it's $108,000 per year. These numbers really get big. And now, by the way, this isn't the total value they're passing on. This is how much they avoid in estate taxes. Yeah. So it's incremental. It's essentially either giving this money to the government or passing this on to your kids. It's not the total value of what they pass on the kids. It's the incremental. And this really value comes from, one is, Peter mentioned this, is you move these assets outside of your state. And so all the growth is gift and estate tax free. And then secondly, because you can pay the taxes on the income from this trust, you're reducing the size of your estate, and so reducing any future gift and estate taxes. And by you paying those taxes, the trust / your kids and future generations get that money instead. And again, this is really, to make it explicit, it's either giving money, using this as reducing the money you give to the government when you pass away, and giving more to your kids or grandkids.
Yeah, and so the other thing that people notice is that it's not a linear difference between year 25 and year 50. That's actually true of a lot of tax strategies. They tend to compound.
To be fair, it's true of probably almost any financial thing. If there's anything, it's the Einstein quote is like, compounding is what's the 8th wonder of the world. Everything in finance, tax is compounding in some sense. And so, probably one takeaway is doing this sooner rather than later has compounding benefits.
Yeah.
Now there's we'll actually kind of move on as ties kind of quickly. We'll bring up this question of, how does the Crummey Trust compare to a 529 plan? And, how do they contrast, and how do you use one versus the other, and how do you use them together?
Yeah. So Sahil brings up a good point. So a 529 plan is another pretty common way that people use their annual exclusion. And so you can use annual exclusion to basically, what a 529 plan is. 529 plan is an educational account that is income tax advantaged. And it's kind of like a retirement account, but for education. And people typically fund them for little kids, and then they use them to pay for college, or they can also pay for high school, private school and stuff. But so how do they compare?
Well, what's the limitation? Maybe let's start with, what's the limitation of a 529 plan?
Yeah. So there's a couple limitations to the 529 plan. So first of all, you wouldn't fund a 529 plan. If you fund it for a baby, you wouldn't fund it for 18 years until they go to college, because it would wind up with way too much money. So the assets in a 529 plan, they're tax advantaged, but you can only withdraw them basically for educational expenses. Congress just added a new small exception where you can take out a small amount for a retirement account. But basically, a 529 plan, the assets in the 529 plan are for educational purposes. And so typically people will fund them with maybe $60,000 or $70,000, but you don't need to give them $36,000 a year for 18 years, because you're going to end up with,
and what happened?
Investment returns way too much money.
So let's say someone ends up with, they fund it for 18 years, and they end up with $2 million in their 529 plan, and college is getting expensive. They end up paying $200K for their kids' college. What happens to that excess amount?
Yeah. So basically, the vast majority of that amount would be trapped in the 529 plan. It's at least in the current law, you'd have to try to transfer the account to another beneficiary who has educational expenses, but you couldn't use that money to buy a house. Yeah. And
so you can also there's retirement accounts that can come into play, but there's constraints on, right?
Yeah.
This is where. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that's right. So there's so a 529 plan. It often makes a ton of sense, but and you might not be able to contribute to a Crummey if you're also contributing to a 529 plan because they're sort of mutually exclusive to the extent that you're using your annual exclusion by funding the 529 plan. But you wouldn't be funding that for the beneficiary's entire life. You'd only be funding that for maybe 3 or 4 years. And so, either you fund the 529 plan for 3 or 4 years and then you fund the Crummey Trust, or maybe you decide against the 529 plan altogether, depending on your outlook. But they're not really totally mutually exclusive because 529 plans tend to be funded only for a short amount of time. The other thing, sort of more directly address Sahil's question, it is a 529 plan, a tax advantage Crummey Trust. So the thing is, a 529 plan isn't that great from a gift and estate tax perspective because there's provision in the gift tax that says that paying tuition doesn't count as a gift for gift tax purposes, and so 529 plans aren't really getting money out of your estate that you couldn't have gotten out of your estate anyways by just paying tuition directly.
It's a tax advantage, and I think that just to be explicit, it's essentially the tax advantage growth is the real advantage. Because there's no, it's avoiding capital gains tax. Let's just assume you're investing it in long-term assets. You're essentially able to avoid the capital gains tax. But to Peter's point, because anyways, again, there's your lifetime gift exemption, there's your annual exclusion. You can then pay Crummey Trust taxes, but you could also pay your kids, grandkids educational expenses on top of that. And so that money anyways could be spent towards that. You're not getting the tax advantage growth on that. And so, but that is a marginal piece relative to the 40% estate tax and those pieces on there. And just to kind of wrap a bow on that, just for time, we are going to do a webinar specifically comparing Crummey Trust to 529s, the up accounts, custodial accounts, just so people can kind of understand of how these things compare and contrast. One's the kind of best practice use cases for each of them, and kind of where those in between gray areas and how to think about that. But just kind of in the interest of time, so if you have more questions, first of all, you can add them in the chat. You can set up time with us directly, and just to kind of directly address some of these other things. We do help people set up and administer these dynasty trusts, whether it's a traditional IJIT, non-grantor trust. We also help people set up and administer other types of trusts, such as charitable remainder trusts, which help people avoid capital gains taxes. And some of those benefits we're talking about 529 plans, it's in some sense a more flexible version of that. And we or some of our partners can serve as corporate trustee based on the situs based on the location of the trust. But yeah, you can set up time with us to chat, visit our website, and we're going to have more webinars. So you can keep an eye on for that, where we go into some of these more detailed things of comparing these, as well as some of these other estate planning structures. As obviously it's with that gift and estate, to kind of bring it back with this gift and estate tax exemption dropping in 2026, it's going to be a big focus for a lot of people to start planning, advisors and CPAs to get ahead of this. And, we want to make sure everyone understands this. And again, kind of our pieces, we can help you set these things up at no cost, same day, and really run it kind of an optimized, automated fashion as well. So, and then let us know if you have other questions. And if you want to, review this, we do have recordings of this. We'll post these on YouTube, where you can see a recording of these webinars and links for our future webinars as well. So really appreciate everyone taking the time to join. I know it gets busy during the week, and please let us know if you have any feedback or any particular topics that you'd want us to go in more depth in future weeks, as we'll be doing this every Wednesday. So really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your week, everybody.